Most commonly, when we teach yoga, we teach in an instructive type of learning. But there is a different way of teaching and learning, says yoga therapist Yasmin Lambat in this free talk. This is a somatic approach to learning, which can help students develop greater body awareness and interoception. Interoception involves the ability to sense subtle shifts in body sensation, and it is a faculty linked to enhance intuition and a greater sense of embodiment. Hello everyone, this is Eva Nordic-Smith, and welcome to this free talk with yoga therapist Yasmin Lambat. Yasmin is a lifelong movement therapist and movement educator. Her work is based on the work of somatic pioneers like Tom Myers, Moshe Feldenkrais, Melvin Traeger, and Eric Franklin of the Franklin Method. In this talk, Yasmin discusses the body sensing method she has developed, which is a body-centered approach to improve body awareness and mindfulness. Yasmin explores how somatic principles deepen the awareness of our kinesthetic sense and illustrates the difference between embodied learning and instructive learning. When we teach yoga by instructing students, Yasmin notes, we are engaging them in a cognitive mode of learning. And in contrast, if we teach from a somatic perspective in an embodied learning process, it encourages a more interoceptive sensory learning process. In this talk, Yasmin illustrates the difference between the two types of learning and discusses how to encourage greater interoceptive awareness in yoga students. Again, welcome.
If we're looking at developing interoception, body sensing is my method, but I'm talking about body sensing, body sensation. And body sensation fits really well into somatic principles. It is a body-centered approach to improve body and mind awareness. It's a sensory approach to learning versus a cognitive. And sometimes it may feel that just working in the body is a sensory learning experience, but not always. We can deepen that awareness. So somatic principles deepen the awareness of our kinesthetic sense, so our sensory part to fascia. What somatic principles focus a great deal on is how the body is shaped by the mind, so that if you want to reshape your mind, you would reshape the mind through the body. And here we're looking at interoception. Sometimes I ask questions, for example, if I'm asking a client to soften through the sternum for release, I would ask them, what's a word that comes up for you here? And I know in yoga practices, I've been in yoga practices sometimes where a teacher or yoga teacher, there's one in particular that I remember, she would have a little bag of stones, that each with them, these little pebbles, and each of them would have a word on it. And the word would either be a word relating to a positive sensation. So it would either be the word grace or joy, acceptance, purpose. And at the beginning of a session, we would reach out for a pebble, and whatever the word was on that pebble, we would embody that sensation. So it was a great way of starting a yoga session and sensing that word throughout the session. So that's a good example of a sensory sensation and a quick example of how you can introduce it into your yoga practice. So body sensation is really important for fascia for the health of fascia. So why body sensing? What is body sensing, which is my method, and what does it encompass? It's a calming and restorative practice that brings together somatic principles, mindfulness, and movement principles, movement based on what we know about fascia now. And what's really different about it is that, not so different from other somatic practices, but what I focus on a great deal is embodied learning, which is very different to instruction. And I'm going to demonstrate that with you right now. So what's the difference between embodied learning and instruction? So in instruction, if you are teaching yoga and you're teaching by instruction, it would sound something like this. And if we were looking at taking somebody through a sun salutation, we may begin by saying, take your feet hip distance apart, or sometimes it might be bring your feet together. So either one. So let's just say, take your feet hip distance apart. Lengthen through your spine. Arms resting by the side. Soft jaw. Wide collarbone. Shoulder blades resting on the rib cage. Just take a moment here to notice how long is the spine. Float the arms away from the body up towards the ceiling. Fold forwards, soften through the knees until your fingertips come to the ground, and step back with your right leg. So that's just an example of an instruction. I threw in there a how does it feel, just to kind of notice the difference when you ask a question. I'm going to take you through an embodied learning sensation to see what is the difference between the two styles of teaching. So if you're teaching sun salutation with embodied learning, it would sound something like this. So can you take a moment to notice what it feels like in standing for you today? Notice where your feet are. Could you take a moment to tune into your body? And when you're tuning into your body, where does your attention go to first? Just take a moment to notice that. When you take your awareness to the back of the body, how long is your spine? How much space do you have between your head and your tail? Can you notice the shape of your spine from head to tail? And take a moment to soften any areas that may show up as being tight today. And if you were to soften, where would you soften within your own body? Take a moment to notice where those areas are, to soften those areas, and come to a place of ease. Okay, so I'm just sharing with you, that was the embodied learning is the way we would teach in a somatic practice, and the instruction was the way we would teach with instruction. They're very different. They go through different pathways of the brain. So when you're instructing someone, when you're telling somebody what to do, it goes through a different brain pathway. It goes into a cognitive pathway. It's a thinking process. When you're teaching from a somatic perspective, so an embodied learning process, it goes through a different brain pathway, and it talks to your sensory learning. There's a sensory approach to learning. One is a felt process, and the other is a thought process. And they're not so completely separate. There is some crossover. But you can see that when you're teaching from instruction, it becomes more of a thought process versus a felt process. In a thought process, your client or you would be thinking, okay, so my feet are here, my feet are hip distance apart. Okay, now I'm taking my arms away from the body. In an embodied learning process, you are in complete sensation of how your own body is feeling and how you can shift your own body into its place of ease. So those are the slightly different styles of teaching with profound awareness through embodied learning versus instruction. So I hope that little demonstration helped you in some way to understand the difference in the teaching. Neuroplasticity refers to the rewiring. Fascia and the nervous system are intimately connected. Yes, you can ease pain very quickly, but can you rewire that memory of pain? So neuroplasticity is a term that we use, or it has been used very, very much so in recent years, to talk about how we can change habits. And the exciting thing for me is how you can change habits using the body, using a somatic experience. Body sensing uses fascial research, as we saw. We looked at psychoneuroendocrinology. And something else I will be sharing with you today is this idea of ontology. Ontology refers to our way of being, how our moods and language influence body physiology. This is really important if you are working with people who, or if you're working in a way that would incorporate the person as a whole. So if you're working in wholeness or integrity, then you would be aware of someone's way of being and how to influence that way of being so that they are in a better space. You can facilitate that by understanding moods, by understanding language, and body sensing uses that in a very simple way. So I'm going to share that with you later on. And the beginning of that is the way we communicate. So when you're facilitating your communicating, communication lies at the heart of the health of fascia. So the way we communicate is an exchange of information between the body and mind via the nervous system. Now this is really important. It's so important because we looked at a slide of the nervous system and how something I mentioned was that we always look at the brain separately to the spinal cord. But they're actually connected. And the function of the brain is to interpret what the spinal cord is experiencing through the fascia, if you like. And we have struggled, especially in the Western world, to understand that there is a mind-body connection. We often think of the mind being in the head, but I would like to propose a new way of seeing the mind, and that is that the body and mind are one. They're not separate. That we experience sensation in the body, and that sensation is interpreted via the body, and the brain is simply the mechanism that gives us that interpretation. So the body and mind and soul are one. And the reason that they are one is because they're connected via the nervous system. It's why your breath quickens when you're stressed, and notice how your breath quickens when you're nervous, or sometimes I use this example. If you ever remember the first time that you fell in love, or when you experienced love for your partner, especially that kind of infatuation sensation, what I call the desire infatuation, and how you have these butterflies in your tummy, sometimes just seeing that person, you know, for the first time, or when you're on your first date and you have this butterflies in your tummy sensation, that is the response of your nervous system to how you're feeling. And if you are like me, and I'm sure we all are, that sensation happens instantly. It's not something that takes time. You know, you don't have an emotion and then the body responds. It happens at once. And this is why, for me, the body and mind are one, and in fact, the body, mind, and soul are one, and it sits in every single part of your entire system. So at the heart of your communication, the way that your body and mind are shaped is through the way you feel, your moods and emotions. They lie at the heart of your communication. They shape your physical body. But if your physical body is your mind as well, that's really how they connect. And it's exactly why feelings of stress and anxiety lead to pain, inflammation, and poor posture. So if you're having a bad day, or if you are, a really good example is if you're sitting at your desk and you are in anticipation. If you're working on a project, you're working on your laptop, and you are focusing so much on what you're doing that the body is in anticipation. So that posture is anticipation from the way that you are feeling. If you go into a calm state, if you're sitting in front of a laptop working, notice how different that is, and notice what happens to you when you're resting in a rested state, sitting, for example, in front of your laptop. So this is why it's important to understand that posture is not just how badly somebody sits at their desk. It's the emotion that's connected with the feeling of sitting at a desk, for example. So the key to restoring that shape is getting into a calm, centered state of ease, and then using movement to reorganize fascia. And something I mentioned here is body integrity, and this is what we'll be looking at more and more as we go through this. It's important to understand this idea of ontology. So what I've got here is a little bit more on embodiment. So I invite you, next time you're listening to someone or listening to yourself, is listen to your listening and notice, does your language reflect your mood? And how does your body respond to your mood? The three are interconnected. How we think, feel, and behave is a biological process that becomes embodied. Moods are felt in the fascia. We've spoken a lot about this, and trigger body chemistry like adrenaline or serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin. If you're feeling calm and relaxed, you're going to produce oxytocin, serotonin, and so on.